On a warm, sunny day in the spring of 1967, when the narrow, crowded streets of Medellin were filled with the sound of car horns, the shouts of street vendors, and the laughter of children playing with plastic balls, in one of the city's modest yet vibrant neighborhoods, a baby boy was born and was named Andrés Escobar. The Escobar family's home was neither large nor luxurious. It was an ordinary house with simple walls, yet filled with sound, affection, and life. Andrés' father was a calm, hard-working man who loved football, someone who, after a tiring day of work, would turn on the radio and his eyes would light up as he listened to match commentaries. His mother was a kind and patient woman, the sort of mother who is always worried about her children's future. When she held Andrés in her arms for the first time, she said with a gentle smile, "This boy has a big heart, the kind of heart that, if it finds the right path, will make many people happy." The air in Medellin was warm that day, but the atmosphere in the Escobar home was warmer still. The sound of the newborn's crying mingled with the mother's prayers and the father's hopeful gaze. No one knew that this baby, now sleeping peacefully, would years later have his name heard not only in Medellin, but across the entire world. That day, it was just a simple birth, the birth of an ordinary boy in an ordinary city. But in that very moment, without anyone realizing it, fate was writing the first lines of a great and tragic story. From his very early childhood, when he was still barely tall enough to reach his father's shoulder, Andrés would clutch a ball and run out of the house. The dusty alleys of Medellin were not just passageways to him. They were his football field, his classroom, and the place where his dreams took shape. Dust rose beneath his feet. He had no shoes, but he had a passion that nothing could stand in the way of. He played with the neighborhood kids, games without rules, without referees, but full of struggle and learning. If he fell, he got back up, brushed off his clothes, and ran again. It was there that he gradually realized he liked standing at the back of the field, stopping attacks and protecting the others. The first team he played for seriously was a small local team, one that had neither proper uniforms nor a real training ground. The kids often played barefoot, and the goals were marked by 2 stones. On those uneven fields, Andrés learned how to read his opponent, when to step forward and when to drop back. He had no coach, but he had experience, the experience of playing in the streets, of facing older and stronger kids. That calmness everyone later talked about on the pitch came from here, from days when he had to make the right decision amid the chaos of the alleyways. Without knowing it, he was laying the foundations of a great defender. When Andrés grew a little older and playing in the alleyways was no longer enough for him, his family decided to send him to a local football academy in Medellin. It was a modest academy with a not-so-even training field, but full of children who, like him, carried big dreams in their hearts. Every day after school, Andrés would pick up his small bag without a single complaint, a bag that held nothing but a simple pair of shoes, a bottle of water, and a whole lot of hope. Under the scorching Medellin sun, he would walk to training, and even when he was tired, he never arrived late. In training, he was quiet, but on the field, he said everything through his play. The coaches gradually noticed the unusual calmness in his movements, a boy who didn't rush, didn't dive into tackles unnecessarily, and read the game before every move. Years passed, and Andrés entered his teenage years. One afternoon, his father called him over, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "It's time to take yourself more seriously." That same day, he took Andrés by the hand and brought him to Atlético Nacional for a trial. Andrés' heart was pounding. The field was bigger, the players were stronger, and the coaches' gazes felt heavier. But when the game began, fear gave way to focus. That trial was more than just a practice session. It was the point where the course of his life changed forever. Andrés would later always say that there are some days in life that divide everything into before and after, and that day was one of them. Andrés' entry into Atlético Nacional meant stepping into a completely different world. This was no longer the dusty neighborhood field. It was a large stadium, stands filled with spectators, and the heavy pressure of expectations resting on his shoulders. At first, he spoke little and listened more. In training, he made mistakes and was sometimes criticized, but he never lost his composure. Gradually, the coaches realized that this boy had something different, an unusual calmness for such a young age. Andrés played as a central defender, a position where a mistake could mean conceding a goal. Yet he had learned not to rush, to read the situation, and to make the right decision. With every match that passed, the team's trust in him grew stronger. His teammates felt secure behind him, and the fans gradually learned his name. They would call out to him from the stands, and when he got the ball, the cheers grew louder. Andrés played for Nacional for many years, experienced domestic championships, and even took part in major continental competitions. Trophies were lifted one after another, but what grew most of all within him was his character. He learned how to remain calm under the pressure of thousands of eyes, how to lift his head after a mistake, and how to play football with respect. Nacional was not just a club to him. It was a school that shaped him into a reliable defender and a dignified human being. Finally, the day arrived when Andrés Escobar's name appeared on the roster of the Colombian national team. The day when years of training, patience, and silence bore fruit. When he held the yellow national team jersey in his hands for the first time, he stared at it for a few moments. For a boy who had come from the dusty alleys of Medellin, this was not just a shirt. It represented a nation. His first international matches came with nerves, but that familiar calm helped him through. He stood alongside more experienced players, listened, learned, and gradually became one of the regular pillars of the defensive line. In the early 1990s, Colombia had a powerful team. People across the country spoke about the squad with hope. The streets were filled with flags, and everyone was waiting for the 1994 World Cup in the United States. Andrés, like the others, carried big dreams in his heart. He wanted to bring pride to his country. But football does not always go according to dreams. In one of the most crucial matches, a moment came in which everything was condensed into an instant. A cross, a split-second decision, and the ball mistakenly ended up in his own net. The stadium fell silent for a few seconds. Andrés stood there, stunned, but still standing. He didn't lower his head, didn't protest, he simply carried on. But that goal was more than just an own goal. It was a turning point that sent his life down a path no one had expected. From that very moment, the pressure began, and fate slowly started to reveal its bitter face. And in the end, after returning to Medellin, the city that had always been Andrés's home, a bitter night arrived, a night that should never have happened. The World Cup was over, but the pressure, the anger, and the toxic atmosphere surrounding Colombian football still lingered. Andrés knew people were upset. He knew his mistake had been seen, yet he believed that time would calm everything. For a few days, he tried to stay home, be with his family, and keep away from the commotion. He would tell his friends, "I'm human like everyone else. I made a mistake, but I had no bad intentions." Even earlier, he had written a letter in a newspaper, accepting responsibility for his mistake, with the same honesty he had always shown. But that night, when he stepped out of the house for a few minutes, and when he stopped in front of a cafe, fate had written a different path for him. A brief argument, a few harsh words, and then the sound of gunshots. One, two, and then one after another. Andrés Escobar, the defender who had always stood in the way of goals, this time could not stand in the way of violence. 11 bullets, one life, and a dream left unfinished. The news spread through the country like lightning. People were in shock, footballers were in mourning, and the world was stunned. A man who had been a symbol of calm, sportsmanship, and respect in football had become a victim of a world that had mixed football with violence. Andrés Escobar is gone, but his name remains, not because of that own goal, but because of the character he showed. That football is not just about winning and losing. Football, above all, is about humanity.